Good morning and welcome to the Faculty of Business Economics and Statistics. My name is Gerhard Sorger. I'm the Dean of the Faculty, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our Science Day 2021. Due to the pandemic situation, we had to adapt our original plans by imposing certain safety measures, including the security checks when entering our premises. I thank you very much for your understanding and patience in enduring these checks. In return, you are allowed to take off your masks while you're in the event location, and you're also allowed to enjoy drinks at the buffet before or after the event. Finally, we had to severely restrict the on-site audience. And to compensate for this restriction, we provide access to the ceremony via live stream. Let me therefore now formally welcome all our guests, both here in the Sky Lounge of the Oskar Morgenstern Center and wherever you are when you participate online. I'm very glad that we are able to meet on this very special occasion. The Science Day 2021 celebrates outstanding research achievements. It is my pleasure to outline today's program and to introduce and welcome our guests of honor, as well as the scientists whose achievements we are going to highlight today. We will begin with the award of an Austrian Cross of Honor for Science and Art First Class. It will be handed over by Federal Minister of Education, Research and Science, Heinz Faßmann. Minister Faßmann, welcome on our premises. As a faculty, we strive to engage in top-level research and in its dissemination. With the Oskar Morgenstern Medal, we express our highest appreciation for distinguished scientists who engage in groundbreaking research in all areas covered by the faculty. Federal Minister of Labor Martin Kocher was supposed to hand over the medal, but unfortunately his duties as minister forced him to cancel at short notice. Instead, the medal will be handed over by Vice Rector Jean-Robert Théron, who will also deliver the laudation for the recipient. Jean-Robert, welcome at our and your own faculty.
Thank you.
It is a special honor for our faculty to welcome Karin Morgenstern-Papp, the daughter of Oskar Morgenstern, and her husband, Mike Papp. Thank you for granting us the right to use the name of your late father for this building, for the medal, and in the future also for our doctoral school. And thank you for giving today's ceremony a special festive setting by your presence. In addition, I would like to welcome Rado Bot, the Dean of our neighboring faculty, the Faculty of Mathematics, and Martin Helwig, currently guest professor at our faculty, and of course, all colleagues, friends, and guests of our faculty of the University of Vienna or of the two award winners. But now, let us all welcome the scientists we are honoring today. Franz Wirl was professor in our faculty for 18 years, and he has been named the most prolific researcher in the field of business administration in the German-speaking area in several international rankings. His research focus has always been, and still is, on energy markets and the environment, topics that are today more relevant than ever. However, his general research interests are much broader and include investment decisions, the reasons for corrective behavior, or regulation and deregulation of industries. Today, he will receive the Austrian Cross of Honor for Science and Art First Class by the Austrian Republic. Welcome, Franz Wirl. Finally, I welcome Muriel Niederle, the Levin professor in the School of Economics at Stanford University, who is a leading expert in experimental economics and market design. Her research on gender differences in competitive behavior was noted internationally far beyond the scientific community. She will be awarded the 5th Oscar Morgenstern Medal for her extraordinary academic achievements, and she will give a talk on her current research at the end of the ceremony. Welcome, Muriel Niederle. Both scientists made outstanding contributions to their respective fields, for which they will receive 2 different awards, the Oscar Morgenstern Medal and the Austrian Cross of Honor for Science and Art First Class. But there is a noteworthy connection. Oscar Morgenstern, the namesake of the medal, received the Austrian Cross of Honor for Science and Art First Class himself in 1976. And I would like to thank Ms. Karin Morgenstern-Papp for pointing this out to us and for even providing a photograph of her father wearing the Cross of Honor, which is now on her own dress. Before I leave the stage to Minister Faßmann, let me mention that the Austrian Cross of Honor for Science and Art is a sign of highest appreciation by the Austrian Republic and is formally awarded by the President of the Republic. I had asked our former colleague and current President, Alexander van der Bellen, to hand over the Cross of Honor himself. But unfortunately, he has other obligations today. But he asked me explicitly to convey his best wishes and congratulations to both award winners. I would now like to ask Minister Faßmann onto the stage.
Sehr geehrter Herr Vizerektor Tyron, Herr Dekan, Frau Niederle, Herr Wirl, sehr geehrte geschätzte Damen und Herren, bevor ich Ihnen das Ehrenkreuz verleihe, darf ich noch einige Grußworte sprechen. Ich freue mich sehr, dass ich heute anlässlich des Science Days der Wirtschaftswissenschaftlichen Fakultät hier an der Universität persönlich anwesend sein kann und darf. University comes back, wenn ich ein Wort von Arnold Schwarzenegger gehe oder missbrauchen darf. Wir können, das wissen wir, Universität nicht so betreiben, wie wir sie im vergangenen Studienjahr betreiben mussten. Gar keine Frage. Distance Learning war okay, aber nun gilt es wieder in den Präsenzmodus überzuwechseln. Universität braucht so etwas wie persönliche Begegnung, braucht den intellektuellen Diskurs und der funktioniert über Zoom-Konferenzen in der Tat und selbst probiert immer nur sehr, sehr eingeschränkt. Ich glaube, dass uns die Impfquote insgesamt helfen wird. Und das ist eine andere Situation als noch im anderen Studienjahr. 80% sind die Studierenden insgesamt geimpft mit Stand Ende August. Das wären heute schon 82% sein. Die Uni Wien hat noch mehr geimpfte Studierende. Ende August waren es 82%. Ich schätze, heute werden es 84% sein. Wir sehen, dass die Doktoratstudierenden Ende August schon bei 85% eine Vollimmunisierung aufweisen, zweimal geimpft oder genesen mit einer Impfung. Ich bin sicher, dass die Professoren und Professorinnen an der Universität irgendwo im 90er-Bereich liegen werden, weil 2 wesentliche Faktoren zusammenkommen, die die Impfquote beeinflussen. Auf der einen Seite abgeschlossene Schulbildung, Rationalität dem Impfstoff gegenüber und auf der anderen Seite Alter, können wir nichts dafür, aber das hebt in der Regel auch die Impfquote. Also ich sage es daher, Schachbrettmuster, 50% Belegung, 3G und dann noch Maske tragen, das ist ein bisschen viel und ich ersuche auch hier entsprechende Strategien zu überlegen, auch um nicht in Konsistenzprobleme mit anderen gesellschaftlichen Bereichen zu kommen. Wenn sich dann die Studierenden, die mit Maske, 3G, Schachbrettmuster und 50%iger Belegung am Vormittag getroffen haben, dann vielleicht am Nachmittag Restaurants aufsuchen oder ein Fußballspiel beobachten und dann plötzlich ganz andere Hygienevorschriften zu erfüllen haben, die nicht miteinander passen, kommen wir in eine Argumentation hinein, Magnifizenz, die wir schwer bestehen können. Ich höre auch manchmal von Professoren und Professorinnen, die über das Distance Learning gar nicht so unglücklich waren und ihre oft auch weiter entfernten Heimatorte zu Heimatorten und Arbeitsorten umfunktioniert haben und selten an der Universität sind oder gewesen sind. Ich will nur sagen, das können wir so sicherlich nicht auf Dauer aushalten. Da wird uns auch die Gesellschaft fragen, wo ist die oder wie kann die Lehrleistung, für die schließlich auch entsprechende Budgetressourcen bereitgestellt werden, eingelöst werden. Ich denke, die letzten Monate haben aber auch gezeigt, wie wichtig Wissenschaft und Forschung ist. Wir haben in den letzten Monaten insgesamt Rückenwind bekommen, gar keine Frage. Ich bedauere es übrigens, dass Katalin Kariko, die, wenn man so will, einer der wesentlichen Mütter in dem Fall des RMA-Impfstoffes ist, keinen Nobelpreis bekommen hat, denn ihre Idee, ihre Entwicklung aus Ungarn kommen, in den USA weiterentwickelt, ist großartig und hat die Grundlage geliefert, dass man zu einer Impfstoffentwicklung kommt in extrem kurzer Zeit. Daran haben wir 2020 noch nie gedacht, dass das so schnell geht. Man hat mit Therapeutika gerechnet, aber nicht mit Impfstoffen innerhalb eines Jahres, innerhalb vielleicht von 15, 18 Monaten. Für mich persönlich war auch, sage ich, hier in dieser Fakultät das Corona-Panel sehr interessant, sehr spannend. Vielleicht kann man dem Bernhard Kittel nachträglich auch meine besten Wünsche ausrichten. Ich fand diese eine Zahl, die er beispielsweise ermittelt hat, zwischen Jänner 2020 und März 2020 haben 50% der Bevölkerung maximal einmal eine Teststation aufgesucht, 30% der Bevölkerung gar nicht. Und das hat schon sehr viel auch erhellt, nämlich dass wir mit all den Maßnahmen letztlich immer nur die erreicht haben, die erreichbar sind, gesundheitsbewusste Menschen im mittleren oder höheren Alter, aber nicht die andere Hälfte oder die anderen zwei oder das andere Drittel der Gesellschaft. In die Kirche gehen die Gläubigen und bei all den Gesundheitsmaßnahmen haben gleichsam die Gesundheitsbewussten teilgenommen. War ganz wichtig, auch für bestimmte politische Maßnahmen. Der eigentliche Zweck ist aber heute ein ganz anderer. Herr Wirl, Sie bekommen eine Auszeichnung, eine sehr hohe Auszeichnung dieser Republik. Ich habe mir sagen lassen, dass solche Auszeichnungen 18. bis 19. Jahrhundert entstanden sind, im Wesentlichen eine militärische Idee war, Tapferkeitsmedaille dem Feind gegenüber. Hier ist es sowas wie Tapferkeitsmedaille im Wissenschaftssystem. Es ist immer eine symbolische Geste, klarerweise eine symbolische Geste, auch heute noch, dank der Republik für ihre Leistungen im Bereich von Wissenschaft und Forschung, letztlich auch im Dienste der Bürger und Bürgerinnen. Diese Auszeichnungen dienen der Wertschätzung, einer persönlichen Wertschätzung, Ansporn für zukünftiges Handeln. Einmal Wissenschaft, immer Wissenschaft. Sie hören nicht auf damit und das ist gut so. Und sie dienen natürlich auch einer gewissen Anbindung, einer gewissen Loyalität des Forschenden, der Forschenden zur Republik. Kann nicht schaden, kann uns allen nur nützen. Gratulieren Ihnen sehr herzlich zu dieser Auszeichnung. Ich habe mich auch ein bisschen schlau gemacht. 2 Jahrzehnte an dieser Universität, fast 2 Jahrzehnte aktiv gelehrt und geforscht. Das ist schon eine lange Zeit und Sie sind heute Professorial Research Fellow. Das ist ein Titel, den wir damals mit Clemens Buchmann entwickelt haben, in meiner Zeit noch im Rektorat. Freut mich, jetzt endlich einen Professorial Research Fellow kennenzulernen. Ich habe auch gelesen, dass Sie über Investitionsentscheidungen viel gearbeitet haben, über Anreize zu korrupten Handlungen, über Fragen der Regulierung und Deregulierung von Industrien. Und besonders hervorzuheben sind Ihre theoretischen Beiträge über intemporale Entscheidungsprobleme und dynamische Spiele. Ich kenne Sie indirekt über Gerhard Clemens, mit dem ich ja lange Zeit im Senat gesessen bin und der Sie immer sehr gelobt hat, als ich gefragt habe, kümmert sich eigentlich in dieser Universität irgendjemand um Umweltökonomie, um Klimaökonomie, um die Ressourcenfrage, um Energiefragen. Und da hat er mir gesagt, ja, das ist der Franz Wirl, der macht das ausgezeichnet. Er hat sie aus einer ökonomischen Perspektive heraus sehr, sehr gelobt. Summa summarum, Sie haben durch Ihre Leistungen, glaube ich, zur Reputation der Universität, der Wissenschaft und Österreichs beigetragen. Ihre Leistungen werden heute gewürdigt. Ich darf sozusagen stellvertretend für den Bundespräsidenten, der ja auch emeritierter Professor dieser Fakultät ist, es bleibt alles im Haus sozusagen, überreichen. Ich freue mich sehr darüber. Ich gratuliere Ihnen im Namen auch des Bundespräsidenten und ich wünsche Ihnen alles Gute, alles sehr Gute auch noch für Ihre weitere Forschung. Ich bin ganz sicher, die wird nicht aufhören. Dankeschön.
Thank you. Following the protocol, I will deliver my words of thanks in German. Okay? So, herzlichen Dank für die Ehrung, dem Kollegen und Minister Heinz Faßmann, für die wertvolle Zeit, die er investiert hat, dem Dekan Sorger, beiden einmal gleich für die netten Schalmeintöne, die Sie hier über mich losgelassen haben. Ich danke dem Dekan und den Kollegen und Kolleginnen in der Fakultät und auch, glaube ich, den Dekanatsmanager, die im Hintergrund die Fäden für diese Ehrung gezogen haben. Es ist ein Glück, auf einer Universität arbeiten zu können, insbesondere an dieser Fakultät mit den vielen interessanten Kollegen quer über die Institute hinaus. Das ist nicht nur ein Glück, weil Max Weber gesagt hat, akademische Laufbahn ist ein Lotteriespiel, sondern auch aus privaten Gründen, weil ich ja in einer Bäckerei Mitarbeit inklusive groß geworden bin, was ja wienerisch gesprochen eine ziemliche Joch ist. Aber nicht nur auch aus diesen Gründen, sondern auch aus dem Grund, dass die Universität ein hohes Maß an Freiheit offeriert. Und um das zu dokumentieren, und ich glaube, die Anekdote versteht man nur auf einer Uni, erzähle ich eine Geschichte, eine Anekdote vom Roland Fryer. Roland Fryer ist vielleicht für einen Minister eine nicht uninteressante Person, weil er schöne Aufsätze geschrieben hat, was bei Bildung funktioniert und was nicht. Und es gibt auch schöne Videos von ihm. Und auf jeden Fall, der junge Assistenzprofessor Roland Fryer trifft Larry Summers, damals Präsident von Harvard. Ich nehme an, Larry Summers sagt den meisten etwas, aber Larry Summers ist eine sehr gewichtige Person. Jüngster Professor in Harvard, 2 Onkel als Nobelpreisträger, Chef der Weltbank, Minister in der Clinton-Administration. Also der wichtige Larry Summers trifft den jungen Assistenzprofessor Roland Fryer und sagt, ich habe einen großen Spender an der Angel und wir wollen, dass du dich mit Bildung beschäftigst. Woraufhin der junge Assistenzprofessor zum wichtigen Larry Summers sagt, Larry, you are late. I just got tenure. Nach diesem Punkt komme ich zu dem, was Barack Obama gesagt hat, you didn't do that. Und da muss man vermutlich wie viele beginnen mit den Eltern, die mich, vielleicht war es sogar meine Mutter, die eine einzige Bildung, eine einklassige 8-jährige Volksschule war, mich ins Gymnasium gesteckt hat. Die Wahl und auch die Ausbildung an meiner Alma Mater, der TU, glaube ich, kann man durchaus als gut bezeichnen. Aber der Kickpunkt kam in gewisser Hinsicht. Später, nach 6 Jahren beruflicher Tätigkeit an der OPEC, kehrte ich an die Alma Mater zurück, an ein Institut, wo so etwas wie wissenschaftliche Forschung nicht stattfand. In dem Sinn war es ein Glücksfall, das, was ich vielleicht ein bisschen hochgestochen als den Argentinierstraßenkreis bezeichnen würde, dass ich dort quasi kooptiert wurde. In dem von Gustav Feichterger organisierten Seminaren gab es derartig offene Diskussionen und ich hatte die Chance, die damaligen Jungstars, Richard Hartl, den verstorbenen Engelbert Dockner, den Dekan Gerhard Sorger und dann später auch noch Andreas Nowak und Herbert David kennenzulernen. Und das war sicherlich eine richtungsweisende Sache für mich. Aber vielleicht noch wichtiger ist die Unterstützung und das Verständnis meiner wundervollen Frau Charlotte, meiner Kinder Charlotte und Franz. Und in dem Sinn ist es für mich jetzt auch eine Freude, meine letzten Baustellen noch zu schließen, denn der Abschied, wenn er dann doch kommt, wird mir durch 4 süße Enkelinnen versüßt. Ich danke für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
So I switch back to English. We are now moving on to the Oskar Morgenstern Medal. The Oskar Morgenstern Medal is given by the Faculty of Business, Economics and Statistics to internationally renowned academics working in the areas covered by the faculty. It was first awarded in 2013 to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the appointment of the first professor in the field of economic sciences at the University of Vienna. Since then, it has been awarded every second year. The award is named after the noted economist and mathematician Oskar Morgenstern, who is also the namesake for the building in which we are currently located. Let me briefly introduce to you some key facts in the life of this scientist who means so much to our faculty. Oskar Morgenstern was born in 1902 in Görlitz, Germany. He grew up in Vienna, where he also attended university. He graduated from this university in 1925 with a PhD in political science. In 1928, he became a professor of economics at the University of Vienna. In 1938, he visited Princeton University, and while he was abroad, Hitler took over power in Austria, and Morgenstern decided to remain in the United States, and he became a member of the faculty at Princeton. At the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, he met the mathematician John von Neumann, and they collaborated to write the Theory of Games and Economic Behavior. This book, which was published in 1944, is generally recognized as the first book on game theory. The collaboration between Morgenstern and von Neumann gave birth to entirely new areas of investigation, both in mathematics and in economics, which have numerous applications of academic and of practical interest. In the 1960s, Oskar Morgenstern revived old and made new contacts to Austria, and in 1963, he and Paul Felix Lazarsfeld founded the Institute for Advanced Studies in Vienna, which has remained a prominent research and forecasting institute in Austria ever since. Oskar Morgenstern received an honorary doctorate from the University of Vienna in 1965, but remained in Princeton until his retirement in 1970. After that, he joined New York University, where he investigated primarily the functioning of stock markets. In 1976, as mentioned before, Oskar Morgenstern was awarded the Austrian Cross of Honor for Science and Art, first class, by Hertha Firnberg, Federal Minister of Education at that time. Oskar Morgenstern died in Princeton in 1977. When the University of Vienna acquired this building and decided to make it home to the Faculty of Business, Economics and Statistics and to the Faculty of Mathematics, the question about an appropriate name for the building was raised. It did not take long until the two faculties jointly expressed the wish to name it after Oskar Morgenstern, who had always been working at the boundary of these two disciplines. And at about the same time, the Faculty of Business, Economics and Statistics decided to create the Oskar Morgenstern Medal, which, as I said before, was awarded for the first time in 2013. Today, the Oskar Morgenstern Medal will be awarded for the 5th time. You will hear more about this year's recipient, Professor Muriel Niederle, in the following laudation by Vice Rector Jean-Robert Durand. Jean-Robert, the floor is yours.
Dear Muriel, dear Miss Morgenstern-Papp, dear Minister Faßmann, dear Dean Gerhard-Sorger, dear colleagues, dear students, dear participants who follow this ceremony on the screens online. It is a great pleasure and honor to deliver this laudation of Muriel Niederle. At present, you have already heard it, Muriel is the Levin Professor of Economics at Stanford University in California. How did she get there? The short answer is through outstanding scientific contributions which have shaped the profession in her field. Her contributions have shaped the profession because they are innovative, they are original and relevant. I will later explain more about the substance of her work and highlight particular masterpieces from her vast vita. But let me just say briefly that she is a behavioral and experimental economist and that she has made important contributions to the study of market design and of gender. So her scholarly work has earned her an outstanding reputation and high esteem in the profession. Accordingly, she has been awarded numerous honors and she has obtained an impressive list of appointments. I would just like to mention 3 of them. She is an Alfred P. Sloan Research Fellow, she is a Fellow of the Econometric Society and a Research Associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research. Professor Niederle had a most impressive career, and her career started, and I'm very proud to point that out, here at the University of Vienna. Muriel Niederle earned the equivalent of a master's degree not in economics, but in mathematics from the University of Vienna. She then boldly decided to pursue her career not in cozy and wonderful and beautiful Vienna, but to go out and conquer the world, so to speak. In fact, she moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts, to earn her PhD in economics at Harvard University. It took her about 5 years to complete the PhD in 2002. And at Harvard, she was supervised by a truly stellar team of economists. Alvin Roth, Drew Fudenberg, and David Leibson. And Muriel's time in Harvard were her formative years, and the match of her supervisor's world-class expertise and Muriel's curiosity, willingness to work hard, and her vast talent was just a perfect match. Indeed, the combination of fields of her supervisors, game theory, and we've aptly heard where it comes from, behavioral economics and experimental economics set the stage for her later career. So let me now answer the question, why is Professor Niederle awarded the Oskar Morgenstern Medal today? So let me read the citation that I came up with Professor Niederle, the Faculty of Business, Economics and Statistics, honors a scholar who has made groundbreaking contributions to economics. In addition, her research has high impact. Her research contributes to saving lives, to make people happy in their work and even in their romantic relations. Importantly, her research is a contribution to paving the way to a more just world with more gender equality and diversity. Let me now explain why this is so. I will proceed by selectively reviewing and commenting on the substance of Professor Niederle's oeuvre. I have to do so, I have to be selective because the body of her work is so vast. For example, if you look at Google Scholar, the page lists 118 articles that have appeared over the last 20 years or so. And more than a dozen of these works have been published in the so-called top 5 journals of economics. And I have selected a few contributions that I find particularly illustrative of the citation I just read. And I will present the works in 3 groups. First group is concerned with issues of basic science and proper method in experimentation. Second group with market design, and the third group with gender. So the first group concerns fundamental contributions to behavioral economics. And Muriel has done experimental work on the relevance of fairness concerns, on contingent reasoning, and on cognitive abilities, among other topics. But I would like to briefly highlight some of her work on time preferences, because this work also very nicely serves to illustrate her contribution to improving methods of experimentation. So many important economic activities involve choices over time, and Franz Wirl has also worked on them. Obvious examples are investment and saving. So standard economics has developed theories of rational intertemporal choice, and an important property of such rational choices are that they are consistent, or more precisely, time consistent. So what does that mean? So an agent who prefers A over B today should also do so tomorrow. Of course, if nothing relevant to the choice has happened in between, and as long as A and B are the same today and tomorrow. But various studies have claimed a phenomenon called dynamic inconsistency, which can be illustrated as follows. So when people are asked whether they prefer to get 100 euros in 1 year from now, or to get 105 euros in a year from now plus 1 week, most people are patient and say, yeah, I go for the higher amount. I go for the 105 euros. But when the year has elapsed and people are asked again, do you want 100 euros now or wait another week to get 105? Then some go for the immediate reward, which means that the preferences between the two options have switched. And such a pattern of inconsistent choice is also called a present bias, because you go for the immediate reward. And this phenomenon of present bias might explain why people tend to procrastinate on difficult but important tasks, why they postpone to quit smoking, to start a diet, or to save for retirement. So experimental tests of dynamic inconsistency have largely relied on choices over time-dated monetary rewards, as in the example I just gave you with the 100 euros and the 105 euros. However, such studies are prone to confounds. So, for example, participants in the experiment may not trust the experimenter to keep the promise to actually pay in the future in 1 year from now. And a switch of choices may thus be more related to beliefs about the experimenter's reliability than actual about time preference. So in an article published in 2015 with Ned Augenblick and Charles Sprenger in the Quarterly Journal of Economics, Muriel found ingenious ways to sidestep such confounds and compare choices over real effort tasks, in which the authors do find substantial present bias, rather than monetary reward, which are comparable, and in which they find very little present bias. And they show that the choices made over the real efforts are more relevant in the sense that they predict well other choices, especially the demand for commitment devices, that are in line with this time inconsistency. So scholarly work that eliminates sources of confound and thereby improves methodological practice is part of the epic quest for robust and replicable results in science. And there are many routes to promoting the reliability of scientific knowledge. And one way to obtain such reliable experimental results is replication. Replication is a key aspect of experimentation because it makes knowledge intersubjective. So anyone doubting a particular result of an experiment can simply repeat it to check for himself or herself whether the results hold. Now, you may have heard of the so-called replication crisis in psychology, because in psychology there has been much publicized results have simply failed to be replicated. And alerted by these findings, economists have also engaged in systematic replication exercises, which fortunately for us turned out to be much more successful. But the episode made very clear that while replications are important, researchers have too little incentives to replicate other people's work. They normally prefer to go ahead and test new hypotheses because the professional rewards for doing so are higher. So in a paper joint with Lucas Kaufman and Alistair Wilson, published in the American Economic Review in 2017, Muriel makes a proposal to promote replications by first strengthening the incentives for replication work, and second, by drawing more attention to the replications that are conducted. In particular, she proposes that top journals publish short replication reports which could summarize novel work replicating an existing high-impact paper, or they could highlight the replication result embedded in a wider scope published paper. So an ingenious, I think, very, very good proposal. In addition, she suggests incentivizing replication with the currency of our profession, which is citations. So enforcing a norm of citing replications work alongside the original would provide incentives to researchers to replicate to both authors and the journals. And she has done even more methodological contributions. One in a related paper, also with Lucas Kaufman, in the Journal of Economic Perspectives, 2015. Muriel talks about, among other things, pre-analysis plans, which have received a lot of attention and a very positive press, so to speak. And such pre-analysis plans describe how data will be collected and analyzed before a project begins, so that researchers tie their hands. And these are, she admits, are very useful for large-scale, one-of-a-kind field experiment. But she argues that the enthusiasm for such plans should be tempered in experimental economics, and that encouraging replications is actually more promising to clamp down on p-hacking and other misleading practices. Let me now turn to the second group of Muriel Niederle's work, which concerns market design. Her work in this domain focuses on when decentralized markets work well, why they may fail, and how one might improve them. As we have seen just a minute ago, properly conducted experiments can be used to speak to theorists, that is, to promote our understanding of when our theories succeed or fail to explain behavior of real people. But experiments can also be used to address very practical issues and to improve our lives. One could call this approach the engineering approach to economics. This type of research has a clear policy orientation and is sometimes described as whispering into the ears of princes, as Al Roth put it so aptly and also a little bit poetically. So Muriel has studied a large number of matching markets. These are markets in which you cannot just choose what you want, even if you can afford it, but you also have to be chosen, as when she went to Harvard. You can't just say, I go there. College admissions in the US are a case in point, and many labor markets are so-called two-sided matching markets, where both sides have preferences. So from her impressive body of work on matching markets, I would like to mention a whole bunch of papers to improve the market for, and this is now the most difficult part of my talk, the market for gastroenterologists. This is a very difficult word, gastroenterologists. These are medical doctors focusing on disorders of the digestive system. So, she has studied finding ways to better allocate talented doctors to suitable hospitals, and this improves the performance of the doctors, of the hospitals, and the overall medical system. Hence, improving the matching of doctors and in some sense is a matter of life and death. So Muriel's work on medical matching markets exemplifies the use of laboratory experimentation in conjunction with game theoretic analysis, discussions with practitioners about institutional detail. You have to know very much the institutional practices, and pilot experiments in the field to solve such highly relevant problems. And Muriel has published several of these papers together with Levin. And it is only a slight exaggeration to say that by doing so, she has contributed to the work that earned L. Roth the Nobel Prize in 2012. So L. Roth says the following in his Nobel Prize lecture. Experiments are one of the tools of market design. So I'm quoting now L. Roth. Experiments are one of the tools of market design. They would not carry the day alone. We would not convince medical administrators to implement a stable algorithm just because we found it worked well in the lab. But experiments amplify and help us understand what we are seeing in the field data. And they help us to communicate it. End of quote. So Muriel has not only studied how to better match doctors to hospital, she has also used her extraordinary analytical skills and her vast experimental talent to study how to match freshly minted PhD in economics to universities. And she has also studied dating markets. It's an unusual expression for a non-economist, dating markets. That is, how to better match men and women who are looking for romance or a suitable spouse. So in these markets, she has studied how sending a credible signal can improve the matches. In a paper published in the journal Experimental Economics in 2015, called, it's a very nice title, Propose with a Rose, Muriel conducted a field experiment in an online dating market in Korea, of all places, with her Korean co-author So-Young Lee. The paper showed that when participants were endowed with such virtual roses that participants can use for free to signal special interests when asking for a date, the quality of the matches improved. And by sending a rose, a person can substantially increase the chance of the offer being accepted, and the possibility of sending roses increase the total number of dates. Muriel has also helped to improve the job market for new economists. This is the title of the paper. And this was published in 2010 with a number of co-authors in the Journal of Economic Perspectives. And she shows that signaling improved market outcomes in this special market, similar to the Koreans looking for romance, applicants in the economics job market looking for a job could send signals to up to 2 employers prior to the interviews at the January Allied Social Science Associating meetings. Let me now turn to the third group of her work, which concerns gender issues. A key concern in this literature is to identify why we observe the different outcomes in labor markets for men and women, and how this knowledge can then be used to devise well-targeted and evidence-based policies to reduce inequality, to improve gender justice and labor market fairness. Muriel's work on gender has received much attention in academia and in the media also. Her work is highly cited by scholars, has informed public policy debates, has attracted considerable attention in the media. For example, Wall Street Journal, Forbes magazine, The Atlantic have all reported on her work. And because Muriel is one of the world's leading experts in using experimental economics to study gender issues, she has been invited to author a chapter on gender in the authoritative Handbook of Experimental Economics that appeared in Princeton University Press in 2017. Now, in principle, gender differences in labor market outcomes can occur for many reasons. They can be due to factors like discrimination, differences in abilities and skills, preferences, or a combination thereof. And it's difficult, if not impossible, to clearly isolate one of these factors when all the others also differ and change over time in uncontrolled ways. So one possible explanation of why men and women differ or have different labor market outcomes is that men and women differ with respect to psychological traits. This claim seems to have some intuitive appeal. For example, about 150 years ago, Charles Darwin thought that psychological gender differences are important. He wrote, I quote, "Woman seems to differ from man in mental disposition, chiefly in her greater tenderness and less selfishness. Man delights in competition, and this leads to ambition which passes too easily into selfishness." End of quote. Muriel writes in this authoritative survey that I just mentioned that, I quote her now, "The study of gender differences has almost since its inception been plagued by ideologically guided interpretations. It is therefore all the more important to provide scientific, robust, and replicable evidence and to present it in a balanced way." And this is exactly what she achieves in her work, and especially in the survey. So Muriel reviews in this handbook article papers that have used experiments to elicit preferences on risk, for example, on time, but also social preferences to study the intuition of Charles Darwin. But she points out, perhaps surprisingly, that these differences, while significant, are sometimes small. A finding which is, by the way, also in line with surveys in the psychological literature. But, in contrast to that, she finds that experimental evidence suggests that gender differences in competitiveness are often pronounced and robust. So her own work on gender differences has, as I already said, has received much attention. And her most highly cited paper was published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics in 2007, together with Lise Westerlund. And the title almost says it all, is that women shy away from competition and men embrace it. Or this is the main conclusion, it's not the title. In this paper, she studies entry in a competitive environment, a so-called tournament, in a situation when we can control or know that there are no ability differences between men and women. This is an important aspect of an experiment. And she finds that men are about twice as likely to enter the competition because they are more confident. In fact, they are overconfident that they will win. In a fascinating study published in the Quarterly, also again in the Quarterly Journal of Economics in 2014 with Hes Loosterbeek and Thomas Buser from the University of Amsterdam, she demonstrates the striking external validity of laboratory studies in understanding gender differences in their later career choices, that is, in the field. The paper shows that the measure of competitiveness elicited in the laboratory predicts actual career choices of high school students in the Netherlands very well. Unfortunately, I should say, women are, despite similar levels of academic ability, less competitive in the laboratory measure, and that also tend to choose less ambitious careers. She has many more exciting experimental findings on gender, and I hope she will address in her talk the implications they have for policy choices in her lecture today. She didn't tell me what she will talk about, but it's my hunch or my hope. So let me just mention two more papers on gender. The first was published in 2012 in Management Science with Lise Westerlund and Carmen Segal. And it shows that introducing a gender quota is a very hotly debated topic also in universities, but in business life, that introducing gender quotas can have beneficial consequences if it encourages high-performing women to apply in the first place. And the second I would briefly like to mention, second paper, is an NBER working paper from the current year, from very recent paper. And in this paper, she argues with a whole bunch of co-authors that the aggressive culture in economic seminars in the US is a potential reason why talented women leave academia. While the study, to my knowledge, has not been replicated for Europe, I fear that the situation might be similar in other countries, and it would be worthwhile to carefully observe the situation also here at the University of Vienna in this respect. So before I close with reading the citation for the medal once more, let me say that Muriel is an extremely well-rounded and highly accomplished economist. She has broad interests, and she has the necessary talents and methodological skills to address diverse topics. She is also very sociable, as is clear from the large number of her co-authors. Some of these are themselves leaders in the field, but she has also published with many junior economists and thus promoting their academic careers. And I personally think Muriel is a great role model for our junior economists here at the University of Vienna. And I hope that Muriel's career will inspire some of them to get out and conquer the world as she did. So let me read the citation again. With Professor Niederle, the Faculty of Business, Economics and Statistics honors a scholar who has made groundbreaking contributions to economics. In addition, her research has high impact. Her research contributes to saving lives, to making people happy in their work, and even in their romantic relations. Importantly, her research is a contribution to paving the way to a more just world with more gender equality and diversity. Dear Muriel, my warmest congratulations to the Oskar Morgenstern Medal 2021.
Thank you very much for this introduction, Jean-Bert. Thank you very much for this honor, for this prize. I'm really deeply honored. I'm especially honored that it's the Oskar Morgenstern Medal, who is such a giant in economics and a fellow Austrian, who also had connections to math like I had. So it's a special place to be here, both at the Faculty of Economics and the Faculty of Mathematics. I'm obviously thanking the committee. I'm very, very happy to receive this prize, and my family insisted I thank them as well. So thank you to my family, and thank you to the family Fritsche, who is like almost family. Yeah, thank you very much. So I will, here we go. I will talk today about the gender agenda. Jean-Bert already alluded to a lot of it, but you will see this a little bit in more detail today. And I'm going to talk about my work going from the lab to the field to policy. Okay, the main motivation for my talk is that there's still a lot of gender segregation, especially also vertical gender segregation. If you look around this room, a lot of economists are not female. That is also true in the corporate world. In the US, it's also true in Europe. Austria, unfortunately, is not exactly a leader in Europe on that respect. When we look at earnings differences between men and women, the gender wage gap, on the one hand, you can think of this as good news. It has decreased, maybe modest decreases, but still. Once we control for occupation, industry, and geography, the gap shrinks, which is great. However, nothing happened in the last 30 years. So this is maybe the depressing part of the news. Now, Europe, again, is not very different from the US. It turns out, and Austria, once more, is not exactly a leader in this respect. And work by Christine Zulehner, who is sitting in the audience, showed that at least about 40% of the gap cannot be explained by differences in education, occupation, or industry. Okay? The fact that a huge part can be explained by differences in industry is relevant because there's indeed a lot of gender segregation that is horizontal already on the education level. When you look at schools, what kind of fields boys and girls study, In places where there's a choice, women are often shying away from math and rather going to literature. This is not the case in the US. In the US, boys and girls take the same number of math classes. But even in the US, there's some underrepresentation of girls among very high-achieving math students. There's some very nice work by Glenn Ellison and Swanson who actually show that this is probably not due to just differences in ability, but due to other factors. College in the US, it looks a lot like schools and colleges in Europe. There's an increasing gender gap the more and more we advance, as we go from the bachelor to the PhD, to PhD in top universities, and finally PhDs at Stanford. We just have a very small fraction of women who get PhDs in science and engineering. Now, labor economics has dealt with that for many years, and the general reasons for why we might have these gender differences might be either discrimination, gender differences in abilities. We just talked how probably for high-end mathematicians on a school level that might not be the case. Or finally, gender differences in preferences. Maybe women want to have jobs where they have more time for the children. It's not necessarily completely out of the question. What I want to do today is to tell you about a new reason or a different reason, which is gender differences in competitiveness. Okay, I want to tell you about how we gather this trait. We want to show it in the lab. We're then going to ask, okay, the lab, great, we have these differences, but it's a bit of a leap to go from the lab to our introduction on why women don't become economists or leading politicians or CEOs. So we want to address whether this trait that we find in the lab can indeed help us understand the introduction I told you about, the gender differences outside of the lab. Once we establish this, we can think about what are we going to do next? Okay, now that we know this, what are we going to do about this? Okay. Some of my work will be experimental. Everything in black is experiments. Some of this also has field work in it. This is all the work in red. And I think it's this interplay between the lab and the field that I think makes this very nice. And it's one way to think of how behavioral economists, I think, should be, is that you go from the lab to the field and try to find reasons on why other people should care, not just those who are interested in this already to begin with. I will present to you lots of papers, but they're all not in detail. But if you ever want to look at them, here they are. When I started thinking about gender differences in competitiveness, I thought naively, psychologists must already know this. But it turns out as economists, we have sometimes different things that we worry about. And we want to know whether in an environment where men and women are equally good, where there's a level playing field, whether there are still gender differences when you have monetary consequences. To do this, we go to the lab. And the reason is the lab allows us for a lot of control. We can control for selection. We can maybe use it. We can really measure performance precisely. This is very difficult outside of the lab. There's going to be no reason of discrimination, or women don't have to worry about being discriminated because we tell them exactly how they get paid. There's also no issues of career concerns or time commitment. This is a 1-hour experiment. If the women afterwards want to have children at home, that's fine. The choices in the lab are not going to influence this. And finally, they're easy to replicate and check for robustness, which is something that Jean-Robert alluded to, which we're going to come back to. Okay, so this very first paper on gender differences in competitiveness, actually the first one where we look at entry into tournaments, is joined with Lisa Westerlund. And we started out with a pool of just 80 people who were students at Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon. And they had to perform a real effort task. They had to add up 5 two-digit numbers for 5 minutes. Okay? And we counted how many they did correctly. Okay? So this is something you learn when you're 6 years old. No reason to expect gender differences. First, they do this for 5 minutes. The first round, they get paid 50 cents for every correctly solved problem. Okay, if I'm in this experiment, I have 5 minutes to solve problems. I know how many solved correctly. I know how much money I would earn in the first round. Then we're going to say, okay, you do it again. And now you're going to be in a group of 2 men and 2 women. You're actually going to be in a row, and we're going to tell them, these are your group members. We actually don't mention gender to make sure we don't kind of point out that we're interested in studying gender. In this second round, only one person is going to be paid. That's the person who solves the most problems correctly. And that person is going to get $2 for every correct problem. Okay? I perform in this round 2 tournament, at the end of the round, I only know how many problems I solved correctly. I do not know if I won the tournament, okay, or whether I was second, or how many problems the winner had. And now we come to the crucial one, which is the third round where I get the choice. I can either decide to get paid via a piece rate scheme, meaning 50 cents for every correctly solved problem, or I can decide, I think I'm very good, I'm going to enter the tournament, I'm going to enter the competition. If I enter the tournament, my performance in round 3 is going to be compared to the previous performance of my group members. Okay? Given that we are in Austria, where we do a lot of skiing, you can think of the round 2 tournament as skiing down the hill in the morning, and then in the afternoon, in round 3, if I decide to enter the tournament, then my time in round 3 compares to the time of my group members from the morning. Now, the reason we do this in a somewhat complicated way is that my choice has 0 impact on anybody else's choices. If I choose tournament here, it doesn't matter what my group members are doing, because their choices now or their efforts now are not going to impact my payment. Which also means if you're worried that women are just so nice, so they don't enter the tournament, so the poor men don't lose, this doesn't have an impact here. Okay? Now, what do we expect? Given the performances of men and women being more or less the same in this task, we expect people who have a 25% chance of winning the tournament to enter the tournament, because remember, they get much more money per piece. We would expect 30% of women and 30% of men to enter the tournament if you want to make the choice that maximizes your earnings. Okay? What do we actually find? 35% of women enter the tournament and 73% of men. Okay? Even though obviously statistics are very important, you don't need a lot of complicated statistics to show that this is really, really different. Okay? Who are those people who enter the tournament? I'm going to show you as a function of their performance in round 2, what's the chance that men and women enter the tournament. So here are the 25% best participants. You can see that, and here are the worst 25% best participants. You can see that at every performance level, men are entering at a higher rate than the women. The worst men, who have like no chance of winning, are entering at a much, much lower rate than the women who are basically guaranteed to win. Now, both men and women make monetary mistakes, if you want. We're losing out on high-performing women. And then, of course, those men who enter are going to get nothing because they lose, instead of getting $3, given that they solved 6 problems. Now, we talk about competitiveness, but of course, competitiveness is not the only thing that enters in this decision. Other potential differences that can play a role here, one is obviously gender differences in confidence. What matters for my decision to enter is obviously how good I think I am, or what's my chance of winning, which means what matters is my relative performance. I only know my absolute performance. So it could be that my beliefs about my relative performance are what drives this result. To do this, we look at beliefs on relative performance in the round 2 tournament to kind of control for this. The second difference is risk aversion. There's a lot of literature on how women are more risk averse than men. And indeed, if I would choose a tournament here, not only is it more competitive, but it's also more risky. I don't know if I'm going to get paid for my performance. So it could be that gender difference in risk aversion can account for this gender gap in tournament entry. Again, to control for this, we're going to have a task where only risk and beliefs matter, but not tournament performance. And what do we find in the end? We find that indeed, vast fraction of this result that I showed you is driven by gender differences in competitiveness. Only about a third is accounted for by gender differences in confidence, and a very small factor by gender differences in risk aversion or feedback aversion. So this was our paper in 2007, and we already talked about how important it is to make sure that other people can find the same thing, can replicate it, that it's really, really robust. You know, it would be a shame if only I find this and when other researchers look at it, they don't. Luckily, this was not the case. It was already since 2015, lots of replications, so this, you know, is a very robust finding. You don't have to be very sophisticated in order to find it. So we have this new trait, we have these huge lab results, and now the question is, why should my labor economist friends care, or macro friends, or you know, why does this help us understand the differences we talked about in the introduction? One way to think about this is to ask, what is the external relevance of this trait? Okay? Does it really help me understand? Is it relevant for gender differences in education and labor market outcomes? So to be able to ask whether competitiveness helps me account for this vertical and horizontal job segregation, we are going to correlate our lab measures with choices outside of the lab. Okay? And specifically, we're going to ask whether competitiveness can help me understand gender differences in choices of math and STEM education. And then we're going to ask whether in a representative sample, competitiveness can help me understand gender differences in outcomes. Okay, let me start with math and STEM education. For that, we go to the Netherlands. This is joint work with Thomas Boes and Hess Losterbeck. The Netherlands system is a bit like the French school system, slightly different from the Austrian system, where 20% of the best kids go to pre-university track school for the last 6 years of school. For the first 3 years, they just take the classes they have to take, and then they have one choice to make. They can go to one of 4 tracks: math, biology, economics, and literature. Now, this is not just the order of how much math there is, this is also the order of prestigiousness. Okay, any French economist you know will have gone to the math track and not to the economics track. Okay? So this is by far the most prestigious, this is the least prestigious. As you can imagine, boys overwhelmingly go to the math track, and girls go to the literature track. They even thought about abolishing this because it's almost like a trap. There's a lot of things you cannot study if you went through the literature track. So we want to ask whether competitiveness can help me understand those choices boys and girls make. To do this, we were able to have access to 4 schools in and around Amsterdam, where we got 1 hour with all the kids, all the 9th graders. We ran our experiment just the way I showed you before. We also asked about confidence. We asked about risk aversion. We also asked them how good you think you are in math, given that math is really the one thing that determines which of these tracks you go to. And then from the school, we get actually the grades of the kids and the choices they eventually make, what track they do for the last 3 years of high school. So let me tell you a little bit about those 400 kids. The grades in the Netherlands go from 1 to 10, where 10 is the best grade. You can see that girls are, if anything, better than boys, which is not unusual. They're also equally good in math. They don't think they're that good. They think math is harder for them. And they make very, very different choices. And in that sense, our 4 classes look a lot like all of Netherlands, with boys being much more likely to go to the math track and girls being much more likely to go to the literature track. So when we look at just what predicts track choices, you obviously have this huge gender gap. And actually, if you're a woman, you want to overcome the female effect, you need 1 standard deviation increase in grade point average. So that's a huge difference. Second, when we look at the lab experimental measure with our kids from these 4 classes, they look a lot like the students in Pittsburgh. Half the boys, a quarter of the girls enter the tournament. Beliefs have an impact, so there's a little bit risk aversion, but there's still a lot left over, which we're going to call gender differences in competitiveness. And now we want to bring these 2 things together. Can this lab trait help me predict who is going to go to what track? First, it turns out if you're going to have a child in front of you, it doesn't matter how much you know about the kid. If you have a choice of knowing the gender, which is kind of precisely measured, or knowing what they do in our little experiment, you're actually better off knowing what they do in our experiment to predict what track that child is going to go to. And second, more importantly, we're going to ask, well, can it help me understand the gender gap in track choices? And again, the answer is yes. 20% of the gender gap in track choices can be accounted for by gender differences in competitiveness. If you control for confidence and risk, this shrinks down a little bit to 16%, but confidence on its own doesn't do anything, and risk aversion basically helps you predict whether people go to the economics track. So what did we find? We find that competitiveness is an important factor in education choices. It can help me understand the gender gap in those education choices. Okay, so we bridge the lab between the gap between the lab and the field by using an outcome of the lab experiment to predict choices outside of the lab. once more, luckily afterwards, other people have followed us and showed similar importances of competitiveness on additional outcomes. There's also some field evidence. One potential issue is that, even these are lots of studies, they're obviously all selected samples. So one question might be, how about when we have a representative sample? Is it going to be the case that even in a representative sample, not just in these high-end samples of Chicago MBAs or the 20% best kids in the Netherlands, that competitiveness is going to play a role? Okay, so to do this, we have to turn to a representative sample. Once more, we're going to do this in the Netherlands, where there's this list panel where every year they ask these core questions on education and labor market outcomes. We were able to add on some questions. Specifically, we are able to add on the Niederle experiment, and we can show that yes, our competitiveness measure helps predict education and labor market outcomes and outperforms a lot of other psychological measures people have used, such as the Big Five, confidence and risk aversion. If you also ever want to do this, this experiment is kind of cumbersome. We also have a very nice question. How competitive do you consider yourself to be? One question, and it does equally well in predicting education labor market outcomes in the same sample and also predicts the experimental measure. Obviously much cheaper to do than running this whole experiment. We can confirm that competitiveness is really different from its preferences, and competitiveness once more accounts a very robust 5 to 10% of the gender gap in outcomes, depending on how many controls you're going to add. So we have competitiveness. We have this new trait. I showed you how to measure it. I showed you that it's robust. Everybody can find it. I hopefully convinced you that it can help me predict choices outside of the lab, that it has external relevance, that can help me understand some of the gender differences in education and labor market outcomes. Now the question is, what are we going to do about this? Okay, where are we going to go next? One policy implication I often hear is, well, how about let's just change the women? No? They are not competitive. Maybe we can just make them more competitive. Lean in, a huge movement in the US. First, I have no idea how to make women more competitive. Second, I don't know what else competitiveness affects. And I have some work with Lisa Wesselund and Christine Exley, a former student of mine, that shows that this lean in can sometimes really backfire. So I'm not sure. I don't know how to touch the women. I don't want to touch the women. We're going to leave them alone. So another possibility might be to, instead of changing the women, maybe we can change the institutions. Okay? We can think of behavioral market design and think about how we have people make choices, how we select individuals. Okay? So it could be that there are some institutions that differ in how much they reward competitiveness, even though what we care about is really not how competitive people are, but maybe how good they are in math. Now, if you're going to have institutions that reward competitiveness, this will have unintended consequences on women, right? Because if you're going to have something where we want to select good mathematicians, but what we end up is selecting competitive people, then we're going to miss out on uncompetitive, high-performing women. So I want to come back to the school system that I already mentioned. In the Netherlands, there's a huge gap in math in the high school system. And the Netherlands, like lots of European countries, they have these once and for all choices. Okay, if you're in Austria, you want to study, I studied math. On day one, I decided I'm going to study math. And then I have 5 years of math in front of me before I get my master's. And then I can think of doing something else. This is very, very different from the US schools, where we found there was no gender gap in how much math boys and girls take in school, which is a very flexible education system. You take a class, you can take a hard math class. If you're good at it, you can take another one. If you decide it's not for you, you can kind of shift down, do a little bit less math. Now, there are obviously lots of differences between the US and Europe. So one question is whether this flexibility is going to have an impact on the gender gap in those choices. In the lab, we can show that having non-flexible choices increases the gender gap that is reduced once you allow for flexibility. But of course, again, there's a big jump from the lab to the field. So can we really, unfortunately our minister left, can we really tell school systems to change and become more flexible? To look at this, I have some work with Nina Buchmann, who is a student of mine, and Nicola Fuchs-Schindel, where we ask, what is the impact of introducing a non-flexible rigid choice on gender differences in education outcomes? To do this, we use the staggered introduction of obligatory license courses in Germany in 1972, but nicely for us economists, they didn't all do this in the same state at the same time. They had differences in timing. So we can use this to study what is the impact of introducing these license courses where you have to commit what you're going to do for the last years of high school, where you're going to get a huge portion of your grade. What do we find? I have to say this is preliminary analysis. COVID hit us as well. It's much more difficult to go to the German microcensus and run stuff. So this is still a bit preliminary, but hopefully eventually won't be. First, what we find that rigid choices are indeed correlated with few women graduating in male and high-income majors. Okay? So because of this introduction of the license course, the fraction of women graduating in male and high-income majors has reduced. Women are also performing worse in the labor market. So on every dimension, it is not good news for women. It is good news, especially for high-performing men. It's also bad news for the bottom 25% of men who, however, are still not hit as much as women are. Okay? So what we find using the German experiment, if you want, is that rigid choices really have a large impact on the gender gap, as might have been expected if you just look at the US versus Dutch school system. Now, I don't know if you have ever worked with a school system. This is basically impossible to change. This would be a really, really large policy change. So I'm going to maybe talk about a second institutional design or change that is a little bit less invasive that we also all have heard of, which is affirmative action. Okay? Now, as Jean-Aubert already alluded to, remember if you go back to the beginning of my talk, we had this gender gap in tournament entry, even though men and women were equally good. But we found that a lot of high-performing women shy away from competition, lose a lot of money, have suboptimal entry in an environment where there's no discrimination, right? They just make those choices. They want to go there. There's no discrimination happening that is kind of directly influencing them. Nonetheless, even in this environment without discrimination, but because we have these suboptimal choices, we can look at what happens if we introduce affirmative action. If we say, oh, we're going to take the best male and the best female winner, as opposed to the two best people out of a group of 6. It turns out when you do that, many more high-performing women are going to enter and also win the tournament. What it means is that in the end, this affirmative action is not that costly. At ex ante, if there are very few good women showing up, you're thinking, my God, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to have to hire a woman who is just really not that great. But by announcing this, you get good women to show up, which makes this affirmative action less costly. Once more, there's room for healthy skepticism. This is a laboratory result. Now, these are still real people. Our students, we still consider them real people. They make choices for real money. This is a real environment, but an environment where there's no discrimination, where there's nothing about getting educated in the specific field. So we want to ask whether these findings from the lab can really tell us something outside of the lab. So we want to basically check whether an affirmative action quota can have a positive effect. Now, if you think of an affirmative action quota, ideally, you want to study this on 3 levels. Okay? The first level is like minimum. It better help the women who are selected. Okay? So if you're going to select a woman through the quota, wouldn't it be nice if that woman somehow improves her performance and gets better, and as a whole is kind of better off? There's some work showing that the answer is yes, at least in many cases. Second, and that's much harder to study, is to check for trickle-down or spillover effects. Is it going to be the case, if you have an affirmative action quota on some high-end outcomes, that we're going to have a bigger pool of women who are now eligible? There are better women who are now eligible. Okay, so the whole pool of women is now better and more diverse and has better performances. Okay? We can call this a trickle-down effect of an affirmative action quota. And finally, I mean, when I worry about the men, most of you in the audience here, what are the costs? What are the costs on men? Okay? Now, to do this, we really need 3 key features of our environment. We need a really good measure of performance. This is difficult. Everybody who has tried to study performances knows that. So it would be great to have a good measure of performance. Second, we need to be able to assess the whole pool of participants, both male and female, to kind of study trickle-down effects, to study effects on how costly it is for the men. And then, of course, a lot of time needs to have passed so these trickle-down effects had a chance to already operate. So I'm going to show an environment that is on its own not that interesting, but it will have an amazing feature because it will have all of these 3 things. Okay? And this is something that you all have heard of. Many of you might even have done it. This is chess. Okay? Now in chess, we have an ELO rating, which is a perfect measure of your performance. The whole point of the ELO rating is it tells me what's your chance of winning against somebody else with another ELO rating. And we know the pool of people, because if you want to participate in a chess tournament, you have to be a registered chess player. This is going to be the pool of people we're going to look at. This is joint work with José de Souza, who is actually in our sample, but otherwise a trade economist. Now, chess is also nice because in principle, it shouldn't matter how you look like, how old you are. Here there's an 8-year-old girl who beats a former football player turned mathematician in chess. Chess also has a huge, let's call it female problem. Only 12% of international chess players are female. There are almost no female grandmasters. The best female chess player in the world now is number 83. The second best is 200. There are 6 women in the top 500, 22 in the top 1,000. If you think economics is bad, chess is like really, really bad. The only woman ever to have qualified for the World Chess Championship is Judith Polgar. We thought maybe this is a change that will have more women following, but her ranking of number 10 is really unparalleled and far away from what women now can do. Now, chess also has an attitude problem. Just to follow up on Judith Polgar, Kasparov said about her, she has fantastic chess talent, but she is, after all, a woman. It all comes down to the imperfections of the feminine psyche. No woman can sustain a man in prolonged battle. Even now, famous chess players make statements like that. She was very happy when she won against Garry Kasparov, who actually then took back his statement. She also said, my sister Susan, she was 16 or 17, said that she never won against a healthy man. After the game, there was always an excuse. I had a headache, I had a stomach ache, there was always something. So chess is an ideal environment to study affirmative action quotas. And if you are a chess player, you know that normally what people do in chess, they play in individual tournaments. However, you can also play for club competitions. Okay? It's a bit like in soccer. Each club, they're like divisions. Each club plays against the other club. The way it works is that there are 8 players in each club. The best player of one team plays against the best player of the second team, and so on. So there are 8 boards or 8 games that are played. We count up the points. The team with more points wins. There could also be a tie. And then Franz said in 1990, you know what, from now on you have to come with 9 players, and one of them has to be a French female chess player. Okay? Then introduced this in Division 2 and in Division 3 afterwards. So we can now study the impact of this policy. We're going to first ask what happens to the women who were selected, who are now playing in Division 1, because before that, basically no woman played in Division 1. We can ask, what are the trickle-down and spillover effects? What happens to the whole pool of women, not just those who play in club championships? We can then ask, is this really because of the quota? I mean, lots of things happened since 1990. Okay, so we're going to have to be a little bit careful that we are not, make sure that these changes we find really can be attributed to the quota. And again, at the end, we're going to turn to the men, see whether they were hurt by this quota. Okay, so let me talk about the direct effect, the women who were selected by the quota. Okay, so remember, they introduced this in 1990. So now every team in the top 12, basically roughly Division 1, had to now come with a female chess player. And I'm going to show you the ELA rating of these women over the last 25 years. Just to give you some idea, if you are like, down here, you're in the top 19% of French chess players compared to the top 3% if you're up there. If you're up there, you basically win almost always against somebody down here, just to give you some idea on what those differences mean. Now, the ELA rating of those women who played in the top 12 teams has increased dramatically in the last 25 years. Now, obviously, there are more than 12 women, but you need exactly 12 if you want the minimum per year. Some of these might not be French women. I mean, in lots of sports, including in chess, there are a lot of, especially after 1990, people from former Eastern European countries who were naturalized. So I'm going to show you what happens to women who actually had the whole chess career in France, who are kind of homegrown, and you can get a similar pattern. Okay? So this is not because of bringing great female chess players to France and naturalizing them. Now, why do these women become better? Okay. So first, do these women become better? Why do they become better? Is it because of these games they played through the club championship? Okay, so I'm going to show you if a woman plays for more than 1 year, does her ELA rating indeed increase? Because it could just be that we replace women with better women, and that's how we get that increase. And if the woman gets better over time, is it because of these quota games, if you want? Because of these games she does in the club championship, where the quota applies. Okay, so first I'm going to show you if a woman plays for more than 1 year, how many ELA points does she gain over time? And I'm going to ask, is this kind of a direct effect of the quota? I mean, it's not mechanical, okay? Playing on its own is not going to give you ELA points. You have to win as well. But nonetheless, we're going to ask whether these gains are due just to games she plays because of the quota. Okay? So first, women are gaining ELA points. If you keep playing this club championship, the women do become better over time. Second, is this because of the direct effect of the quota, because of these extra games they play in the club championships? And the answer is no. These club championship games on its own actually don't deliver any ELA points. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose. But as a whole, they get better, and they gain those points in individual chess tournaments. Okay, so great. We have this direct effect on women who are selected by the quota. It's like the minimum, we have that. How about trickle down and spillover effects? If we look at the number of female chess players, these are teenagers and these are adult women, the number of female chess players has ballooned since 1990. Again, I mean, this is great, but lots of stuff happens since 1990. Let me first show you what's the fraction of girls among teenage players. And you can see that actually not that much happened. Okay, also the number of boys has ballooned. So the number of fractions of girls among teenage chess players has been more or less constant. It's a little bit increasing, but not that much. However, the number of women among adult players has increased dramatically. Okay, so we do have an increase in the number of adult female chess players relative to the gains of male chess players. Second, we can ask, I don't know, just more women, but also better women, or more better women than before. And one way to look at this is to just ask how many women are in the top 100, top 1,000, top 2,000 in France. And you can see that that number also has increased dramatically. Okay, there are now 5 women in the top 100 in France. It's only 1 woman in Austria, who is number 2,000 in the world. But also among the top 1,000, top 2,000, the number of women has increased a lot. Second, if you're familiar with chess, to be able to be a FIDE-rated player, at least in the past, you had to have a certain ELA rating to be eligible, which was 1805 for women and 2205 for men. And we find this number of elite female chess players in France has also increased at a larger rate than the number of elite male players. Okay? So good news, there are more female chess players, there are better female chess players, there are more really good female chess players. Now the question is this really because of the quota, or just because since 1990, the whole society has changed? Now to do this, what I'm going to do is we're going to compare France to other EU 15 countries. Okay? If our effects are driven by global effects, then we would expect the share of French in the EU15 to be constant. Right? If every country found these changes, then French should not be special. However, if the quota drives the French phenomenon, we would expect among female EU15 chess players, elite chess players, the French women to be increasing over time. Right? That would tell you that France is indeed special, whereas this just tells you that, well, every country has more female chess players. So maybe we didn't need the quota because France is the only country with a quota like that. Okay, so this is the fraction among female elite chess players for France before 1990. Just in case you don't know, France's population is around here, 14%. So French was really not great in the representation. And since the introduction of the quota, French female chess players have ballooned compared to the EU15 female counterparts. Okay, this suggests that the effects we found are not general EU-wide trends. This is really special to France, and therefore probably due to the quota. Now, I just told you this is because of the French phenomenon. Now, one worry is how about the men? Why did French women become better? You can imagine that the chess clubs now have to be nicer to women. Maybe they give them extra classes. That's money that maybe comes away from men. Maybe just had to build like female toilets. It turns out that was a problem as well. So we can ask, what is the cost to the male chess players? Okay, and once more, what we're going to do is we're going to turn to the EU15. But before I do this, one cost to the men is that they have to now share the spotlight. Each team is going to come with 8 men and 1 woman, as opposed to just 8 men. And in Austria, all the men also had to share the spotlight. It used to be Heimat bis zu große Söhne, and I was very proud when it was changed to Heimat bis zu große Töchter und Söhne. I think we can all agree that sharing the spotlight is not a huge cost. If men really don't want to share the spotlight, we could also switch. But more importantly, it could be a real negative externality on men. Okay, so it could be that male chess players from France are getting worse compared to the EU15 counterparts. Okay, so I already told you among female elite chess players, the fraction of French has increased. How about when we look at elite male players? If there's a negative externality, then we would expect the fraction of elite chess players who are French to decrease. Now, it could be that it's not obvious whether it decreases. It could be that if you're a 20-year-old man who decides whether to keep playing chess, it might be fun to have some women at the chess club as well. You might also become better because you don't want to lose to a woman. Or there's lots of reasons that it's not obvious it has to be a negative externality. And indeed, we find that male chess players from France also improved over time. Okay, so at least in this case, the quota did not have a cost or not a huge cost on male French chess players. Okay, so we found that this quota helps women who are directly affected, has trickle-down effects, which are really probably due to the quota, and did not have negative externalities on men. Okay, so chess is great. We already said that we don't care about chess per se, maybe that much. How can we use this quota outside of the chess environment? Okay, given that we're in a university, this seems to be like a great way to think about that. If you are familiar with the UK system, in the UK, every 5 years, departments are ranked based on their research output. What if we say, you know what? We're also going to rank you based on the research output by your female faculty. This is very different from saying you get extra money by having 2 women that you sit in a corner somewhere and you don't care about, than by saying, no, what we're going to care about is not just that you have women, but how good they are and how much you invested in them and how much you help them produce good research. Okay, so that would be one way in which you could think about exporting this outside of chess. So I want to end my talk by reminding you of what I showed you. We talked about this new trait on competitiveness, how we found it in the lab. The lab was really great by having these controls to really find it. We told you about why it matters, what's external relevance. And then we talked about policy implications, where indeed I think we should change about institutions, and we shouldn't just think about how to change the women. Okay, and to conclude my talk, I'm very honored and really very humbled to receive a prize, especially the Oscar Morgenstern medal, who is obviously a tremendous role model in many aspects, but also one that it is very touching to read him talk about his collaborations with John von Neumann. And in that sense, I also want to thank many of my co-authors who have been part of this research. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Muriel, for this exciting overview of your research on gender issues, competitiveness, and the interrelations. I thank everybody here in the audience and in front of the computer screens for joining us on this very special occasion. And I close the event for today. Thank you very much. I also thank, I should not forget it, thank all the people who have helped to organize this event. It's not easy in these times, and we needed a lot of men and women power to organize this event. Thank you very much. Have a good day.